Hi, I'm Chris Fitzgerald, and thanks for tuning into the Bass Technique series. In this installment, we're going to be talking about the subject of thumb position on the bass. And we'll be looking at various techniques related to thumb position. Things like how to place your thumb on the string, how to leverage your arm and your body to get a good stop with the thumb, basic chromatic position, and different hand shapes and finger orientations that bassists use in different situations. And for most of this video, we're going to be in a very close-up orientation where what you'll be seeing is mainly the two hands and the front of the bass and the fingerboard so that you can see the techniques being discussed in the best possible resolution. But before we do that, there is one topic that we need to cover while we're still here in widescreen mode, and that is the subject of what is thumb position? How do we define what thumb position actually means? When I was coming up as a young player, I understood the term thumb position to mean that area of the fingerboard above the point where the neck meets the body. I thought that because beyond this point, once the body and the neck coincide, once you go beyond that point, your thumb can no longer be on the back of the neck. So I thought thumb position meant any place beyond basically about here, this was up in thumb position. And some people still define the term in this way. They say when you're playing up in this part of the neck, you are in thumb position. But that's not how I want to define thumb position for this video. For me, my definition of thumb position is going to be a technique in which you are using your left thumb to actually act as an extra finger and stop the string rather than just resting on the back of the neck and supporting the other fingers and helping to guide them. So by this definition, thumb position just means anywhere, anytime you are using your thumb as an extra finger. It can be up here in this area of the neck normally referred to as thumb position. But sometimes I might find that same D. Sometimes it might be advantageous to play with the thumb down lower on the neck. And I would still consider that thumb position. You'll see players going even far lower than that D. And as long as you can find a way to make it work with your body to where you can generate enough torque and force to play comfortably with the thumb as an added finger down on the neck, by our definition of thumb position, all of this is thumb position. Anytime you're fingering a note with the thumb and having the fingers out in front, that is what we're going to call thumb position. And before we go to the close-up shot, I'd also like to address the issue of why thumb position is so useful. Thumb position is useful mainly because it gives us the ability to play with 4 fingers instead of 3. Let me explain, because your first thought is, well, we've got 4 fingers anyway. But as anyone who's spent any time with the double bass knows, down in the lower positions, our hands aren't really big enough for most of us. Some people can do it, but I can't, and most people don't learn this way. Our hands aren't big enough to finger 1 finger per half step. It's just that the space between notes is too large for us to comfortably do that. So most bassists come up with what's called a 1-2-4 fingering system. And in a 1-2-4 fingering system, it's just like what it sounds. First finger plays the first note, second finger plays the next half step up, and the fourth finger plays the next half step up. So that essentially gives us 3 fingers to play with, which is comfortable because we're not having to spread our fingers too far apart, but it's also limiting. Well, once you play in thumb position, we're actually getting rid of 1 finger, we're getting rid of the pinky. But once we're in thumb position, we're actually using all 3 of these fingers, 1, 2, and 3, and we're using the thumb. So we're actually gaining an extra finger. We can play with 4 fingers instead of 3. Which is really, really useful. Gives us a lot more versatility and mobility. Obviously, having an extra finger has all kinds of advantages. The other reason why thumb position is incredibly useful is just because of the nature of our thumb. Human physiology sort of set us up so that these fingers are really good at opening and closing, not very good at moving side to side. It's, you know, we can do the Vulcan thing, but it's not really easy to do. Whereas the thumb has free range of motion anywhere it wants to go. It can move towards the fingers, away from the fingers, it can move up, it can move back, it can move in a circle. It is a very dexterous finger, and like on the piano, pianists all know that the thumb is the most useful finger on the hand because of all the things that it can do that the other fingers can't. And so when we start playing in thumb position on the bass, I know I gradually discovered, and I think most of you will too, that the thumb at first is a very clumsy and awkward finger to use, and it's hard to figure out how to leverage it to make a stop on the bass. But once you get past those initial obstacles, it actually becomes the most useful finger in many ways, the most useful finger on your hand. So why you would want to use thumb position is to play with 4 fingers instead of 3. And so at this point, we'll move on to the close-up shot so we can talk about basic techniques related to how to get started playing in thumb position. Well, the first order of business is to figure out where to place the thumb on the string, or perhaps better put, where to put the string on the thumb. We've got this whole area of the thumb that we could use, and players first starting out often have difficulty figuring out what part of the thumb you should press the string down with. Some people will try at first, and they'll take this area of the thumb right in the middle of the thumbnail and try and press down the string there. Most people who do this for about 10 seconds discover that that's a very, very painful place to press down the string, because it causes the skin and the nail to dig into each other due to the force to press the string down. So that's not a good place. You'll also see lots of people, when they start playing, they'll use this knuckle right here, this middle knuckle of the thumb, because it's a hard spot on the thumb. They'll use that spot and press down the string with that. And that can work. As a matter of fact, when I first started playing, that's where I first tried to press down the string, and it worked for a while. 2 things kind of made me move it though. The first was that there's very little flesh between the bone and the outside of the thumb, so that kind of like with the nail bed, the string digs into it and becomes painful pretty shortly. But the other reason is, the further down the thumb you use to press down the string, the shorter the distance between your thumb and your first finger, the shorter distance that you can reach. So if I'm putting this part of my thumb on the string, I can only reach about to here, whereas if I move up further onto the thumb, I can reach higher. So the real question is, between the knuckle and the nail bed, where is the best place to put your thumb? And each person will have to answer this for themselves. I'll show you what I do. I'm going to sit here and dig my string into the thumb for a second so that it'll leave a nice indentation. And I'll hold it out here, and if it doesn't show up on the video, I'll put a close-up of it as well. This spot right here, right before the nail bed meets the thumb, there's plenty of flesh there. There's plenty of room to build up a nice callus. You have plenty of reach. If you stop the string there, in this position, I can reach a perfect fifth between thumb and the index finger. Not that I would ever really need to do that, but I've got plenty of room to maneuver. And so my preferred spot is right there, right before the nail bed begins. It gives you a nice place to build a callus, and it also avoids that sort of painful aspect of playing on the knuckle or playing on the nail bed. Most players, when they first started playing in thumb position, can only play for a short amount of time, because until you have a callus built up, it's very, very painful to play with the side of the thumb. It's like any new thing that you do, your body has to react to it and build a callus. As you can see, the callus I have on my thumb is large and thick and kind of unsavory looking. It almost looks like something is growing on the side of my thumb, which in a way it is. It just comes from years and years of playing with the side of the thumb. When you first start playing, you won't have that. And so what I did, and what several people recommended to me and was great advice, so I'll pass it along. You play for a minute or two until it becomes too painful to hold the side of your thumb onto the string. And then I would go and get a Band-Aid and put the padded part of the Band-Aid around the thumb where I was practicing trying to build a callus, and I would play for a few more minutes until it became too painful. And then at that point, because I'm a nutcase, I would go get another Band-Aid, and I would have 2 Band-Aids wrapped around the thumb. And I would play until, even with 2 Band-Aids on, it was just too painful. And then I would leave it alone and just practice regularly, practice something else. And over time, this enabled me to develop, probably within 3 to 6 months, I was able to develop a decent callus to where I could play, half an hour in thumb position without excessive pain. And after a year, I don't even think about it anymore. So that's how to place your thumb on the string, advantages and disadvantages of different thumb placement. And like I said, I recommend right there by the nail bed, and just building up that callus gradually. Give yourself time to get used to it, and give the body time to build a callus. In the next segment, we'll talk about how to use your arm, wrist, shoulder assembly to leverage the weight of the arm and the leverage from the shoulder to make a good clean stop with the thumb without having to put a lot of stress on the hand. Now that we know where to put the thumb on the string or the string on the thumb, the next order of business is how to position the thumb and the arm around the thumb in order to get a good clean stop with the thumb. When I first started playing in thumb position, it seemed like it was impossible to press down the string without a lot of undue stress on my hand. And then there came a point where I realized it's not about the hand, it's about using the arm to press the string down rather than the hand. So the first thing we need to learn to do is to put the thumb in what I think of as a locked position. It's like you're giving someone the thumbs up. And when you put your thumb in this position, actually go ahead and put your thumb in this position and feel what it feels like when you try and move it. When you're giving the thumbs up, the thumb is locked. It doesn't want to move this way or this way. It doesn't want to move front or back. It's pretty much locked into a position. And once it's locked into that position, you can set it on any object and move your arm around it and actually put the weight of your arm on that thumb in the lock position. If it's not locked, it'll just move and it'll be floppy. You want to lock that thumb out. And once that thumb is locked out, then you put it on the string right where we talked about, wherever you find is your go-to spot on the thumb to put the string. And then you press the string down. Well, pressing the string down when your thumb is locked, your thumb, as we've already said, can't move when it's locked. It doesn't move in any direction, really. So what it means is, what we really need to do in order to press the string down is not to try and move the thumb. The thumb is stationary and fixed. We're going to move the arm around the thumb. So the best way that I know of to get a good stop in thumb position is to make sure that the arm is high enough to where the weight of the arm here is actually all resting on that place where the thumb meets the string through the locked thumb. And there's a lot of ways to check for this. You may have some of your own that you'll find as you make your way through this journey, but one thing that I'll mention that I discovered over and over and over again, and I hope to save some of you the trouble, is that in order to have a good chain of energy from the shoulder and the torso down through the elbow, through the wrist, to the thumb, everything has to remain more or less open. In other words, you can't have your wrist bent like this, or you're going to put a lot of strain on your wrist. You can't have your elbow in too tight or your shoulder in too tight, because if you do that, that energy and that weight and that leverage from your torso will not make it to the thumb. Your arm should be in an open position, shoulders slightly elevated so that the arm, actually feel this in the chest, so that the arm is pushing the string down rather than the thumb. The thumb is just the mechanism on the end of the chain. arm is high enough, I don't have to do anything but lock the thumb out and let the arm rest on the thumb. If I start to lower the arm, I start to lose that stop. And notice right here, this is one of the classic mistakes that young players use in thumb position, is this bent wrist. If you bend your wrist, you're cutting off all the energy that comes from the arm and the shoulder and the elbow and all of it. You're cutting it off right here at the wrist. And the reason why a lot of people do this is because we get lazy and we rest our arm on the body of the bass. As soon as you rest your arm on the body of the bass, you've cut it off from all this energy. You don't want to do that. Instead, you want to keep your arm up so that all that weight can transfer. When I watch really great players play, I see maybe a slight flex in the wrist, but more or less it's close to a straight line right here. And that tells me, and the arm is open, and that tells me that they're just resting the arm on that note. It's okay, by the way, you see a lot of players play and you'll see this part of the forearm here touching this edge of the bass. That's okay. That's sort of a reference point. And that doesn't require that you break the angle of the wrist as it does when you're resting your whole arm on the bass. You can lightly touch the edge of the bass and that's okay, and that actually gives you a reference for where you are, kinesthetically speaking. You can say, okay, I'm on this note because it's this far from where my arm feels the edge of the bass. But as soon as you start to rest, you're cutting off all of that flow. And I'll leave this segment with an exercise that's really nice to help you get the feel for this. Lock out the thumb, place it on the string, have your arm nice and high to where the weight is actually pressing down into the string, and now play a chromatic scale with the thumb without raising it. And you can go down lower if you want. And as you notice, as I go lower, my shoulder has to come higher and higher and higher to allow that weight to go into where the thumb needs it to be. So as I go higher, the shoulder comes actually around and lower. As I go lower, the shoulder and the rest of the arm have to go higher to keep this nice angle of the wrist intact. So that's locking the thumb and using the weight of the arm to make the stop. Now that we've got our thumb together, we know how to place the thumb on the string and how to leverage the arm to press weight through the thumb. Now it's time to add the other fingers into the equation. And what we're going to do in this very short segment is just talk about the idea of basic chromatic position. And it's just like what it sounds like. Once your thumb is in position, we're going to go ahead and play the D where the octave harmonic is. We want to place the other fingers each a half step apart from the thumb. In the last two segments of this video, we're going to talk about various ways to do that. But for now, it's more just about the spacing, that we want to get everything a half step apart. And we'll expound on that idea later. So first thumb, D, E flat, E, and F. We want to be able to do that on each string for the most part. Mostly we will be playing in thumb position, we'll be playing on the top three strings, the G, D, and A. Occasionally you'll play in thumb position on the E as well, so we'll go ahead and cover that, but it's just not as common as the other three strings. So you get your thumb in position, and then we'll go down to the A string, down to the E. This is going to be really difficult. In order to make the E work, everything is the same as we talked about before, but you've really got to turn your shoulder around in order to get that weight to go all the way to the E. Notice that as we go from the E to the A to the D to the G, the shoulder drops, and as vice versa, as we go to the lower strings, the shoulder has to not only come up, but kind of come around to get the hand to where it needs to play. So we're going to play on the E string, E, F, F sharp, G. On the A string, A, B flat, B, C. On the D string, D, E flat, E, F. On the G string, G, A flat, A, and B flat. Now in the last few segments of this video, we'll be talking about different ways to orient the fingers, the traditional way, a newer way, and basically the shapes of the fingers and combinations of techniques that every bassist should experiment with all of them and find out what works for them. But for right now, basic chromatic position. Put your thumb on the harmonics. Only don't play them as harmonics, actually press them down with the thumb. And then a half step up for each successive finger. Well, now that we've got the left hand in chromatic position with the thumb aligned where the harmonic would be and each of the fingers a half step up successively, it's time to talk about the shape of the fingers and the different options that a player has for how to hold the fingers when playing in thumb position. There are basically two finger shapes. Lots of variations on these, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the two basic shapes are curved fingers, which look like this, where the fingers have a nice curve to them, and especially you look at the shape of this knuckle closest to the string. So the knuckle closest to the string is bent forward rather than being bent back, and that maintains basically a curved shape in the finger. So you have the curved finger, and then you have the collapsed fingers, which look like this. So with the collapsed finger, the finger starts off shaped as it does with the curved finger, but then the knuckle closest to the string actually collapses backwards. And in the case of the third finger often just plays very, very straight. Let me put my hand in the correct position for that, right? So you have curved fingers, which look like this, and collapsed fingers, which look like this. And before we go any further with that, I feel like I have to give a disclaimer, and the disclaimer is this: I know great players who play with curved fingers and who swear by curved fingers as the technique that works the best, and great players who work with collapsed fingers and who also swear by that technique. I myself play with a combination of the two techniques. It's really going to depend on what your hand is comfortable doing, and to a degree, who you study with and what they want you to focus on. And so it's going to be a combination of those two things. Let me talk about a couple of issues having to do with each of these finger shape types. With curved fingers, the advantage to playing with curved fingers is that you're playing with the tip of the finger. And when you play with the tip of the finger, first of all, the bone is right beneath the tip of the finger, so you've got a hard surface right underneath the flesh. And also the surface that you're playing with is smaller, so you can get away with using less force to press the string down when you play with curved fingers. So when you play with curved fingers, you don't have to press quite as hard because the force is more concentrated, and you get a very, very clear bell-like sound out of the stop. Playing with collapsed fingers also has its advantages. When you play with collapsed fingers, at first you would think that there wouldn't be any advantage to playing with collapsed fingers. But the advantage that I've found to playing with collapsed fingers and talking to players who play in this particular way, the advantage is that when we play, remember we lock our thumb out like we're giving the thumbs up. So instead of actually having to press with the thumb, we're just resting the weight of the arm on the thumb. Well, when you play with collapsed fingers, you're doing the same thing with the fingers as well. Rather than having to try to maintain a curved shape, which causes some the muscles in your arm to engage to hold your fingers in that way. You're putting your finger on the string and you're letting the weight of the arm actually make the stop, and the finger locks out much in the same way that the thumb does when we give the thumbs up. And this will come much more into play in the next section where we talk about fixed position versus free or vibrato position. But anyway, to recap, in this section, you can play with curved fingers, you can play with collapsed fingers, or you can play with some combination of the two. Well, the next section of this video deals with two techniques which are a little bit controversial among bassists, so I want to take a moment and give a disclaimer about those two techniques. The two techniques in question are fixed hand position in thumb position and free or vibrato position in thumb position. If you happen to see the video in this series called Left Hand Technique Basics, those two concepts and ideas and techniques were presented lower down on the neck as options for players to explore, tools to put in their toolbox to help them have a more complete skill set for any musical situation. And as we move forward in thumb position, those two techniques come into play again. The disclaimer that I want to add is that I'm not advocating for one to the exclusion of the other or the other to the exclusion of the first one. I think they're both useful techniques that are that can be used in different musical situations. I also think that every bassist's hands and body shape and length are different, and the way that they apply leverage to the bass is different, and that every bassist should try all of these techniques for themselves, try them in different musical situations, and find out what works for them. So I think all the techniques are useful, and I just want to present them as objectively as I can and talk about strengths and weaknesses, positives and negatives of using both techniques. And with that said, we'll go back to the close-up shot and present the techniques themselves. The two ways to orient the hand in terms of moving from one note to the next in thumb position are a fixed position and a free position. And we're going to start with the fixed position because it's really the more traditional of the two and the one that is most frequently taught, especially to beginners, and the free position is more of an advanced technique. So we'll start with the fixed position. In fixed position, the main concept about it is that once you are in a chromatic position, that your fingers, there's several things about it, but your fingers should be evenly spaced so that they are already spaced to the half step alignment that they're supposed to be in. So if this is a D, it means that when I apply these other fingers, they should be spaced already so that there is a half step between each of the fingers. Whether you are curved or collapsed, as you can see, I'm in collapsed position here. But in fixed position, the idea is that the spacing between the fingers is already present, so that all you have to do is drop the finger down where it's already in position. Another aspect of fixed position, which is really important, is the idea of the anchoring of the thumb. In fixed position, which is, again, is the traditional technique, the thumb is anchored wherever it is initially placed. In this case, we're on the octave D. And so that the thumb remains pressed down even when you're playing the first finger. And the thumb and first finger remain pressed down when you're playing the second finger. And thumb 1 and 2 remain pressed down when you're playing with 3. And the thinking behind this, and the reasoning behind this, is that when the thumb is already pressing the note down, it's a lot easier for the first finger to press its note down because the thumb will have already gotten the string very close to the board. Likewise, moving from 1 to 2. And so that's basically the two most important aspects of fixed position, are that the fingers are already spaced, and that the hand maintains that half step spacing between them, and that everything is anchored towards the thumb. and by everything anchored towards the thumb, then it's easier for each successive finger to press down the string because it's already closer to the fingerboard. Advantages of this position, the first one that's really obvious is intonation. If your hand is already in a position to where the fingers are a half step apart, even when you raise them up from the board, and you maintain that position, then it's really easy to play the next note in a passage because you already know where it is. It's a matter of your hand is maintaining this shape, and you drop the finger down where it already is within that shape. And so that's really important. I think that's why this is usually the traditional position that's taught to beginners, and rightly so, because you're saying this is what your hand needs to do in order to play in tune. The fingers need to be this far apart. Another thing that's important to think about when you're playing in fixed position is the position of the arm. The arm, on the face of it, once we're in this position, we can say, well, the arm doesn't really have to do all that much, because if you look at the elbow and the upper arm here, as I'm playing in this position, it's not really moving all that much. And so you may think that the elbow and the arm doesn't have that much to do with playing in fixed position, but that's actually not true, because in order for this position to be correct, whether you're playing with curved or collapsed fingers, the arm has to be in a certain position to allow the fingers to actually be in the right space. So it's really important that the arm not be too far back or too far forward, because that will move the fingers into the wrong place. So those are the basics of fixed position, and that's something that should be practiced obviously on every string. Also note that when fixed position is moved, the hand is moved as a unit. So if you were starting on a different note, you'd be moving that whole hand shape. Well, the second position that we talk about is a newer technique, a more modern and kind of fluent technique that I refer to as free position, but in the previous video, Left Hand Technique Basics, I also refer to it as vibrato position. And I think vibrato position is a really good descriptive for this, because in vibrato position, rather than having the hand fixed and having to hold the fingers at certain distance apart, the hand is relaxed. If you think about where your hand would naturally fall when you just let your hand relax, the fingers can be a little bit closer to each other. You're not trying to spread them out to a certain position. And in vibrato position, what's basically happening is, rather than the fingers already being spread, the arm if you watch this part of the assembly as I'm playing this little chromatic passage, you'll see that the arm is actually doing the work and placing the fingers where they need to be in order to play the note that they're assigned to in this chromatic position. So rather than the arm being stationary and the fingers moving up and down while still spaced, the fingers are relaxed. And the arm moves the fingers into place. Another difference between fixed and free position is that in fixed position, as we've said, everything is anchored towards the thumb. And when everything is anchored towards the thumb, when you play with 1, you're actually pressing down with 1 and 2. Playing with 2, you're pressing down with thumb 1 and 2, etc. Well, in free position, it's a very different concept. Because free position also relates to the ability to play vibrato, it's very hard to play vibrato when you're pressing down with 3 fingers, as in fixed position. If we think of this as vibrato position, it's maybe a little bit more descriptive, because when I play with 1, the weight is no longer on my thumb. The thumb, while I'm not trying to pull the thumb up and move it away from 1, all of the weight of my arm is on 1. So in free position / vibrato position, all of the weight is on the finger that's actually playing. Which leaves the player free to vibrate on any note on any finger at any given time. And that's why this is, for a lot of players, this is a sort of situational position. Many players will play in fixed position until they need to vibrate, and then they will actually relax the hand into vibrato position to play vibrato on a longer note within a passage. So the benefits of free position, obviously the one we just talked about is vibrato. Also notice that as I'm playing with 3 here, the other fingers are actually coming and pressing, not pressing, but are bunched upright around 3 to help facilitate the transfer of weight, so that each finger carries the entire weight of the arm and the leverage of the arm. So the other advantage of free position, in addition to just being able to vibrate, is the ability to transfer weight from one note to the next within position on a string, and therefore it's much easier to play hammer-ons and pull-offs, especially as a pizzicato technique, much easier to play hammer-ons and pull-offs when the weight is transferring. And you see that the arm and the wrist are moving. And so those are the 2 positions: fixed position with a predetermined spacing, and free position with a more relaxed, loose spacing where the weight transfers to each note that is being played individually. Well, if you've made it this far, you know that we've covered a lot of information. We have covered placement of the thumb on the string, how to leverage the thumb into the string, chromatic position, curved fingers versus collapsed fingers, fixed position versus free position. And these are all of the basics that you need to really get started in exploring thumb position. And take your time, do it a little at a time, as much as your hand will allow, and get used to the way that your hand feels in this particular position. Before we go, I'd like to cover one more thing just to give us a little musical exercise that we can work on in the meantime as we're getting ready for beginning to actually play in earnest up in this position. And that is the B-flat scale, without getting into any type of musical notation or any sort of written notation. If we're in chromatic position, here where we were with our thumb on the harmonics A, D, and G, and we're in chromatic position, if we go to the A string, put our thumb where the A is, we can play a B-flat major scale by simply playing 1 and 3 on the A string, thumb 1 and 3 on the D string, thumb 2 and 3 on the G string. So again, that pattern within this chromatic position, whether you're playing curved or collapsed, whether you're playing fixed or free position, if you're playing in this chromatic position, 1-3 on the A string, thumb 1-3 on the D, thumb 2-3 on the G. And so take some time and experiment with just getting around that scale, playing the scale up and down. And then maybe playing some melodies like the one I just played, or any melody that exists in a major key. You shouldn't have too much trouble finding melodies which exist within an octave of a major key. And then maybe some exercises as well, some patterns. And try the patterns going up and down. Well, that will give you plenty to work on. You can create a great warm-up exercise out of that. You can play a lot of music just in that one chromatic position. And I hope you have fun sort of exploring just that amount of material that you can play in one position. The next video will be about how to play melodies and to beginning soloing in thumb position, and we'll expand on the ideas basically given in this video and talk about musical applications of those same things. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time.